Hello everyone, this is American 3071 with another video for you. We have now entered the 7th part of this series on alternate British India. In this video, we will go to both world wars and how this alternate India was both impacted and affected these conflicts. By around 1914, before the onset of World War I, India has around 180 million people on the subcontinent, of which 23 million are of European descent. Bengal would hold the vast majority of these people at 18 million, out of a total population of 24 million. Madras would hold 5 million from a population of 12 million. Combined with mixed-race individuals and Christian natives, the numbers would total around 32 million people, or roughly 71% of Britain's home island population. Such numbers are enough to give Britain domination in that corner of the world. Because of this, all other major powers are doing everything they can to balance that out and prevent Britain from overwhelming any opposition there. Even though Britain has domination over Chinese trade, along with control over Taiwan, major powers such as Japan, Russia, and France quickly move to reduce that power imbalance. When the Boxer Rebellion breaks out in 1898, the other major powers see an opportunity and quickly overwhelm the Middle Kingdom with far more troops than Britain is able to muster, particularly among the Russians and Japanese. After this conflict, the great powers quickly convene to carve up the Far East as best they can. Because of universal opposition to Britain in the region, London quickly acquiesces to whatever is decided in this meeting. France is to get the southern Chinese island of Hainan, Japan gets Korea, Russia gets Manchuria, and the Americans take into consideration keeping the Philippines indefinitely instead of preparing them for independence in the distant future. In this conference, Britain is barred from bringing in any more colonists onto Taiwan, which is generally fine with London as they start to see Taiwan as a cash colony rather than anything worth settling permanently. When all is said and done, reality shifts different than what was planned. Russia and Japan go to war over Manchuria, which Japan wins, thus isolating the Japanese and putting them in the Anglo-American sphere. In the subsequent years, returning back to 1914, France floods Indochina with more colonists to counter Britain, though with less success as only 1 million French have settled southern Indochina by the onset of the Great War. America builds a stronger navy and puts more troops and even American citizens on the Philippines, thus increasing interest in the region for American businesses. We then enter World War I. As in our timeline, the series of events leading up to this war still occur, starting in the Balkans and spiraling into a global conflict. In the Indian colonies, millions of young men are shipped out to the front lines, joining Australian and New Zealand troops in this conflict to fight in Britain's many theaters of war. The war ends in much the same manner, despite British manpower advantages in this alternate timeline. Now we go into the interwar period and enter the beginning stages of the messy Indian independence movement. But first, thanks to their participation in the Great War, London would grant Bengal and Madras dominion status as they had done with Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. This would help pave the way for these colonies to gain independence further down the line, though their presence would cause some friction later on. Speaking of independence, the Indian National Congress forms around this time, seeking greater autonomy from London, specifically the Raj. However, the Muslim members of this movement also began advocating for the transfer of the Sindh region from the Sikh Empire, which was by now a protectorate of Britain, to the Raj. Lahore would strongly object to such a demand, as well as demands from various tribal groups in Afghanistan, most notably the Pashtuns, to receive autonomy from the capital, especially considering the growing Sikh minority in these regions. London would mostly ignore these demands as they would prefer Lahore manage these areas rather than the Raj. Yet this would not stop such agitations from growing. For now, though, things would remain peaceful on the subcontinent. Entering World War II, we thrust the subcontinent into the Pacific theater. When the Japanese launched their near unstoppable offensive, the forces of the Rising Sun quickly seized territory all the way up to the eastern edges of the Raj, threatening the subcontinent and putting the colonies in a state of panic and fear. Calcutta and Madras quickly mobilized their populations for total war, along with the forces of the Raj and the Sikh Empire. Millions of colonial subjects, allies, and Dominion citizens would fight tooth and nail to push the Japanese back from their homes and families. With the industrial might of Bengal and Madras, along with millions of soldiers fighting an existential conflict in their eyes, the Japanese forces were pushed back farther east. When Allied forces reached the Thai border, the government there nominally retained their neutrality, though unofficially they switched to the Allied cause. Anglo-Indian forces quickly seized the capital of Bangkok, kicking out Japanese forces from the country and pushing both south into the Malay Peninsula as well as east to liberate Indochina. On their push through Indochina, Allied forces encountered astonishing scenes of mass internment camps for ethnic French civilians, guerrilla forces from the French forces forced to resist a hostile Japanese military presence, and pro-independence unrest from native South Asians, along with the usual fanatical Japanese resistance. The first thing that was done is the freeing up of French civilians, of which over 50,000 were killed through various means of starvation, torture, or execution. Many more suffered under brutal Japanese occupation. These French civilians and soldiers would be relieved to see the incoming Allied forces liberating them from occupation. Yet tensions between the French and ethnic Indo-Chinese populations would intensify soon after, as during the Japanese occupation, they had allowed these groups to govern their own people directly, and when Allied troops came in to expel the Japanese, French authorities attempted to restore their old authority. Such tense situations would not be lost on either the Anglo-Indian or ethnic Indian troops, having just liberated them. This same story would play out among other places the Allies would liberate from the Japanese control, though with varying degrees of tensions. Allied troops continued to liberate more territory from the Japanese, retaking the Malay Peninsula and Singapore before the war's end in 1945. Millions of Indian and Anglo-Indian troops would continue to occupy many of the newly won territories for another couple of years, before slowly demobilizing and heading back home. Both world wars would profoundly reshape the political dynamics in India. The incredible debt incurred by London in winning these wars would force colonies like Bengal and Madras to become more self-sufficient, Bengal having little difficulty doing this while Madras struggling somewhat, though both colonies would eventually get a handle on things by the end of the Second World War. Ethnic Indians across the subcontinent would be very divided by the war's end in regard to independence. Many in Bengal would simply seek equal rights and prefer Bengal to go the same way as Canada or New Zealand. In Madras, the situation will become more volatile as huge swaths of the ethnic Indian population would seek to join in an independent, unified India, while the white population and many Indian Christians would prefer Madras to be a separate nation, with some calling for a union with Bengal instead. This will be further complicated with the demands from the Muslim Indian Congress to partition India into a Muslim and Hindu nation, with many in the Congress seeking to gain Muslim-majority territory from the Sikh Empire, such as Sindh and parts of Afghanistan. The messy partitioning of India will happen, but in the next episode, as I continue the alternate history of plague-affected British India. Join me next time for more on this fascinating what-if scenario. Also, if you are interested in more alternate history, then I would recommend my book, Star and Symbols, as it takes place in the future what-if America, the first book of the Broken Mantle series I am currently writing. Thank you.